Hey, and welcome to episode 60 of Think Like a Hacker, where we chat about WordPress security and innovation. We have an awesome episode for you today. We chat about a little bit of furor around a top 40 influencers list in WordPress. Chrome has made some interesting changes to their browser, and DHS is making some changes to facial recognition. So get ready for an awesome show. All right, Kathy, how's it going?
It's going well. How's it going with you?
It's good. It's good. We are in the same place we were last week. We're at LSI, and we're trying a different lighting setup. I think we kind of screwed it up last week, which is always fun, and we're always getting better. So you can ping us on Twitter and tell us how badly we screwed it up or how we're improving. But yeah. And the weather in Denver, believe it or not, is actually gorgeous today. It's sunny and a little bit of snow on the ground, and yeah, having a good time. How's it going over there?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a little bit hazy, but I will take winter in Phoenix. December in Phoenix is pretty magical, so I'll take it any day.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I guess there's our top story is an interesting one. Someone posted a WordPress 40 WordPress influencers list, and some people are not too happy. What's that all about?
Yeah, well, it's the end of the year, and everybody's posting, sort of years in review and top lists and things like that. And WPblog.com posted a top 40 WordPress influencer list. And I was only aware of this because a number of people that I am friends with on Twitter started talking about it. And then they started talking about the people who were missing from this list, namely women and other people that would show the diverse nature of the WordPress community. And my Twitter just kind of blew up. So it was a little bit of a story, but not really reported in the news. But it's something that kind of highlights what happens in any industry, but also in the WordPress industry. And I thought it was kind of interesting because no matter if you're going to put together a top list of influencers, you're going to miss people. If you're going to try to say that there's only a certain, no matter how big the list is, you're not going to encapsulate everyone who makes WordPress what it is. So I thought it was an interesting thing for us to discuss. Can you actually say that there are a group of people who are more influential than others? What do you think?
Oh, I just don't think I would have posted a top 40 influencer list at all. I think you're playing with fire when you're doing that. But it's odd. So just to be clear, was there not an even sort of a gender distribution on the list, and it was predominantly men? Is that the gripe?
Yeah, it was predominantly men. In the top 10, there were no women, and there were no people of color. Maybe there were a few, but it was primarily white men, and that's something that I think in the tech industry gets highlighted a lot. Is that and everywhere else, right? Sure. But in the tech industry, we definitely hear about it more. That there are not as many people of different backgrounds.
And so I think, I guess from my perspective, there is the fundamental, issue of equality. And then there's kind of another side to that, which is folks that are essentially self-promoting by making a hell of a lot of noise. They're basically self-promoting activists, and they can be really, really tiresome. But there is also that fundamental issue that equality is helpful for society, and it's also incredibly helpful for whether it's a film or WordPress or whatever. You get those different perspectives and those different energies that come to the table, and so having a sort of a balance, whether it's gender or sexual preference or race or whatever, you really get those different perspectives, and so it really is quite empowering. But what really surprises me about this is that it's kind of weird, because from my perspective, WordPress is actually skewed towards women being the biggest influencers. I think of, and this is off the top of my head, I don't have a list that I'm working from here, but like Kathy Druin, yourself, Raquel, I mean, everyone who is an organizer at a WordCamp or contributing to the community in other ways that is occupying a tremendous amount of their time. And very often at huge sacrifice, and these are also people, I mean, if you want to talk influencer, they're in very influential positions. I mean, Kathy in particular is the sponsor coordinator for WordCamp US, as well as doing everything else that she does. And so that's kind of a powerful position. I mean, from your side, you're very involved. I mean, you probably have a massive list of folks that are influencers, right?
Oh, definitely. Well, there's different levels of influence, and there's influence in different ways. So, I mean, I can give you the top people who are core influencers. I can give you top people who are security influencers. I could give you top people who are, individual WordCamp influencers. And like in Phoenix, we're going through the process of selecting speakers right now. And there is a group of people, many of whom are women, who are going through a list of over 150 submissions and trying to whittle that down. And our selection by going through that is influential, because we're influencing what, basically the Southwest United States is going to be hearing from different people speaking at WordCamp Phoenix, and we're deciding who those people will be. And we make diversity an important part of that decision, and that making sure that there's a good representation of people from Phoenix, from the Southwest, as well as women and people of color and various backgrounds. So that's influential too. So for having this list, it just seemed kind of comical to me that we would want to have anybody try to say like an open source community is influenced by this set of people, and these are the people who you should follow to really understand what WordPress is all about. You can't. You can't select a group of people and say, these are the people who make WordPress what it is, because WordPress by its very nature, and something that we showed in the film that we made, is open, right? It's open source. And for it to be successful, it has to be inclusive of as many people as possible. And that's part of the reason why WordPress as a community, as software developed by a community, is successful, because there are so many voices that are contributing.
For sure. I actually think open is a very interesting case, the film. And if you're new to our podcast, you can visit, we made a short film, it's a documentary about the WordPress community. You can find it at open.film, and it is open source. You can grab it, download it, and remix it to your heart's content. What's interesting about open, though, is that, I don't, we never went in there with any sort of agenda or trying to position it as being, feminist or biased towards inclusivity or anything like that. We just selected the best interviews that told the best story, and I think we ended up with, is it predominantly women? It feels like it might be. Sean's nodding his head behind the camera over there, and he actually made those selections. So yeah, that's a fine example. And another one is, of course, if you look at our podcast, we've got, again, like just looking for great people, not let's position ourselves as supporting this, so let's select these people. No, we just interview great people, and we've got some amazing interviews with leaders in the WordPress community. So yeah, but just so that I know who's going to unfriend me, who actually put this list together? Not that I'm witch hunting here. I mean, by all means, make your lists, but who did that? So we have the context at least.
Yeah, it was a site, wpblog.com. It's a relatively new, I think, news outlet about WordPress, and they put this together. I think December 3rd was the date on it, but December 11th this morning is when it kind of went nuts. I'm almost afraid to look at my Twitter. It's scary when you pick up your phone and Twitter has 30 next to it. Oh no, what's happened, right? And it was just this. So it's definitely getting some discussion. And I think it's a good discussion to have. And it's one of the reasons why I pitched it to you of something for us to talk about is what makes WordPress what it is, and this community behind it. Who do we celebrate?
Yeah, and I think so. Good try, WP Blog, and we're not beating you up over here or anything. I think the message here is maybe, I suspect you're going to get a lot of advocacy on Twitter, and Twitter certainly facilitates anger and outrage and so on. It's not a great platform to have a relaxed dialogue about this kind of thing. But what I would suggest is not necessarily trying to artificially stuff your list with people that are going to make it more balanced and more representative. Instead, go to WordCamp US and various other WordCamps, connect with the community and talk to folks out there. And what you'll realize is that it is actually very diverse. And simply showing that data is probably a helpful approach. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's, I think it was fine to post this, and it obviously, from a marketing perspective, it's always good to get people with lots of followers and say, hey, you're an influencer. Share this on your Twitter feed, right?
Yeah. So maybe that was the deciding criteria, is they just we're like, who's got the most followers and who will retweet this because they kind of like themselves being in it. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
Should we move on?
Let's move on.
It's a sticky one, isn't it? Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be another list at a different time to create a different furor, so.
Right, and why are we always selecting these sticky subjects as our lead story? It's like, yeah, let's navigate this. But I actually don't feel like it's a sticky subject. I think the data is very real, and it's important to just reflect what's actually out there. So,
it's
all
fun.
right, so okay, so Google plans to give slow websites a new badge of shame in Chrome. I love your phrasing there, badge of shame. What's that about?
Okay, well. There's various badges of shame that Chrome shares. If you do not have an SSL on your site, they will alert your site visitors that your site is insecure, which often freaks out people who don't understand what that's all about. Moving forward, they're going to now alert site visitors if your site has been shown to load slowly. So this actually was announced last month. But there's been some discussion about this. It hasn't been launched yet. It's sort of like this, I suppose, warning shot that has been fired, that if you have speed problems with your website, this is something that you should consider. There's a jet flying overhead, so if you hear the sound of freedom,
no, it's fine.
The sound of freedom is flying over my house at the moment.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So this is really interesting because a slow website is bad enough, or it is. It does a good enough job of driving visitors away, but you're saying that Chrome's gonna do their bit to make sure that happens and that the fast websites are favored. That's super interesting, isn't it?
It definitely is. Page speed and performance speed of your website is incredibly important, and there's tons of things that you can add to your site to make more functionality, but how often are site owners actually testing their site speed? And Google's basically telling site owners that if you do not have a fast site, if you're not using page speed insights, if you're not using Lighthouse, a lab tool providing personalized advice on how to speed up your site, if your hosting provider is slow, if you're not taking steps to make sure that your users are getting the best experience possible, Chrome's going to warn them ahead of time. And this is going to not only affect, site search engine optimization and where you're ending up in the search engine result pages. It's going to actually start stopping visitors from visiting your site if you're getting this badge of shame kind of showing up ahead of time, showing that your site is not a good experience.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think in the hosting industry, there's been a huge emphasis put on speed.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'll just tease this a little bit. We actually have a utility that we're going to be making available shortly. It's not part of our core product, but it's going to be a way to look at site speed. And I'll just leave it at that. But it's looking amazing. And so we care about that too.
Yeah.
And we've obviously spent a lot of time optimizing that on our own site. You're seeing the marketing messages and also the fundamental product innovation that's happening in the hosting space with trying to make sites as fast as possible and consistently fast.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I think this is going to just
pour more gasoline on that fire in the hosting space. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely will. And I think it ultimately leads to a better experience for end users visiting websites. So it's all good, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And so I guess Google is just innovating on Chrome, and they're also launching with a password protection and a bunch of security fixes. What's the story there?
Yeah, Chrome 79 just came out, it appears yesterday, and it includes a number of password protection improvements. Now, most of us in the security field are aware of Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned as a place to keep an eye on your credentials, usernames, and passwords and email addresses that have ended up in data breaches because websites haven't taken care of their security. And the problem there is ensuring that you're using using unique passwords on all sites, because once one site gets hacked and your password ends up in a breach, those passwords can be tested on other sites, and it could, lead to having compromises across the board because of your credentials being reused. Now, Google has been warning about this in a separate browser extension and its password checkup tool, but this is the first time that they've baked it into Chrome. So I did some poking around to see if they were using Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned, but it appears that they're using their own version. So what actually ends up happening is that when you're logging into a site, Chrome sends a hashed copy of your username and password to Google, encrypted with a secret key known only to Chrome. So no one, including Google, is able to get that username password from that encrypted copy. And then they use a technique called private set intersection with blinding that involves multiple layers of encryption and compares your encrypted username and password with all of the encrypted breached username and passwords that they've seen. And they make this efficient with a 3-byte SHA-256 hash prefix of your username to reduce the scale of the data.
Right. Yeah, and that's actually the same technique or similar technique they use for the GSP.
Okay.
Is using hash prefixes so that they don't actually have to send the data across the wire. They can just send a representation of the data, and in fact, it's a representation that is it's a hash prefix, so it is not a full hash, and so it could match multiple things. There's a greater chance for collisions, which makes it a worse representation of the data that they've hashed, if that makes sense. And so it's a little bit more secure in that way.
Oh, excellent. Great. Yeah. And, this is new in Chrome, so I'm sure that people will start poking at it and trying to see exactly how it works. But I think it's great that that Google is baking this in. I mean, there have been tools out there like Have I Been Pwned and the Watchtower that's built into 1Password that allow people to kind of stay on top of their passwords and ensure that they're using unique passwords, and that if a password ever is in a breach, that they're notified about it. But to have this readily available in Chrome is just going to make the web a safer place.
Yeah, and it's really interesting they didn't use Troy's database. I know that Cloudflare integrated with Troy, but I have a feeling that's for two reasons. The one is performance, and the other one is risk management. On the performance side, it gives Google the opportunity to really architect the way their own browser talks to their own API. And then on the risk management side, I know that I met Troy and chatted with him in Redmond a while ago, probably about a year ago, and super cool dude, and he's really contributed so much to the web and to online security in general. But I do know that he was concerned because his job is to accumulate breach credentials. And in doing that, you have people sending you breach lists or compromised lists of credentials and so on. And I think Troy is very technical, and I'm assuming he's done a great job of keeping that data secure, and maybe even just hashing the data and then getting rid of the original breach database. But you're kind of trading in information that is circulated on the dark web
or whatever you want to call it, whatever trendy term for the the sort of online underground is these days. But and then he gets that, and he's essentially making it available, and one might argue monetizing it either directly or indirectly. I forget. I haven't looked at his business model these days, but there's risk associated with that, and so having by doing this themselves, Google it gives Google the opportunity to be opinionated about the way this is implemented and have their security team and their legal team and so on also be opinionated about the way it's implemented. So anyway, but yeah, it's great. I would also give Troy a little bit more kudos because he kind of pioneered this.
Right.
And it's now making it into Chrome, and that is a very, very big deal. He should definitely get credit for that from the online community. So
yeah,
that's cool.
It is. He actually did. He did tweet out that sort of a congratulations to Google for doing this. So he's definitely recognized that this is a positive and a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and speaking of advocacy, which is what we started the podcast with, DHS is making some changes to facial recognition. They're actually rolling back some of their facial recognition. That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it does. We reported about the concerns with facial recognition for travelers leaving and coming back into the United States via airports. But apparently some privacy advocates had spoken with the Department of Homeland Security and expressed their concerns. So they have stated that they are reconsidering that plan of basically compiling facial recognition of American citizens, and their travels. So, I mean, this is kind of interesting too, because when we were talking earlier about the surveillance state and all of the different countries that are participating in surveillance of their citizens. And you said that we're not even the worst, are we?
No, as far as I know, we're not even close to the worst. I mentioned to you I'd seen that diagram. I think it's like bar charts or something like that shows the most security cameras or most surveillance per capita.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, I haven't looked at it lately, but I think China is at the top, and then the UK is one of the big ones as well. Did you take a look at that?
Yeah, I did. I've got the chart up here. We'll share it as a part of the video as well, and put it on the show notes. They had top 10 countries by number of CCTV cameras installed in millions, and China is like 200 million, and the US is at 50. And then the country right after that was Germany, 5.2 million. So definitely China is keeping an eye on things.
Yeah. And well, plus it's cheaper for them because they're all made there, right?
Of course, yeah.
Right. But I guess I'm of two minds here. On the one side, if you're going through a border, you're showing or if you're traveling on an airplane, you're showing your driver's license, which identifies you. It has your picture on it. And at that point, they recognize you going through that checkpoint. If you're traveling internationally, of course, you're taking your passport with you. And again, you are revealing the data to them that you're passing through their airport. And so I'm a little confused about what the big deal is in terms of facial recognition. If you're coming into the country, you're showing them your passport. They have your photo on the passport. They're actually taking a photo of you at the border checkpoint. How does this differ? And there's two sides to this, right? We want private spaces. I think Moxie Marlinspike did a wonderful talk that I've mentioned several times at RSA a few years ago, where he really explained why private spaces are necessary. And the way he put it is that, in his opinion, it is necessary for a society to be able to break the law under certain conditions for society to progress and for those laws to evolve. And one example is gay marriage and so on. I mean, that used to be. Some countries it was the death penalty, and in the U.S. it was you were very ostracized, and that has now turned around so that we have legalized gay marriage and so on. And for that to happen, people actually had to have private spaces where they could break the law. It's the same with the legalization of marijuana, for example, which of course has medical implications. For that to happen, people had to smoke a joint in their house when they had cancer and realize that, oh my goodness, it really helped me with the pain or with sleeping or whatever. And so private spaces are a necessity for a society to progress. And to have private spaces, you have to have privacy. You have to have a level of privacy. You can't have people surveilling your home, breaking through your front door, and so on. And I think that extends to other spaces as well, whether it's an office or whatever. So that's the one argument, the one side of the argument. The other side is safety. Now, when I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and I might have mentioned this on the podcast before, a lot of very bad things were done in the name of safety. In fact, I'm going to translate this from Afrikaans, but the government came up with the term, die swart gevaar, which was the black danger, and convinced white people that if they don't have this horrendous environment of persecution, their lives are in danger. And so, you need to trust us to make the right decisions here because these people are really dangerous. And in fact, yeah, it was a horrible time. But, and then on September 11th, you saw the same thing where there was a very bad incident that happened in New York, obviously. And we had the Patriot Act that was passed. And that led to surveillance laws and an overreach, which was kind of rolled back with Snowden's disclosures and so on. And the excuse there again was your safety. And I think there's two sides to it, right? There's a potential overreach, but there's also the need for actual safety. And I have unfortunately been in environments where you have a lot of crime and you don't want to be out at night and that kind of thing. And that is not a nice place to be, and it's not a nice way to live. I have friends that have been through some horrendous stuff, and even folks that aren't but live in those environments are constantly vigilant. There's this kind of hypervigilance that happens, which takes your energy away from the other things that you want to do. And so you have to balance those two aspects. And I think with the surveillance, at airports, it feels like that's really useful. That's a really helpful thing. Surveillance of people coming in and out of their homes, probably an overreach. I was in New York over the weekend, actually. I was in a bus, on just a public bus kind of heading from LaGuardia into town. And I counted 5 surveillance cameras in the roof, and I think there were more because some of them were darker colored and I just couldn't see them. And that the bus driver obviously can't look at that because he's driving. So that's obviously going to a central location. And no doubt they have algorithms they're applying to those live feeds that are coming in so they can make automated real-time decisions, whether you call that facial recognition or something else. It might even be seeing a lot of kinetic movement on the bus, which might indicate that there's a fight that's broken out and they can alert the local police. So these things serve a purpose, but people also need privacy. Societies need privacy. And so it's finding that balance, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So lots of advocacy in this week's show, right, Kathy?
There is a lot of advocacy.
Although we're not advocating for a particular direction, I think we're presenting both sides of the argument here and hopefully adding some technical perspective and cybersecurity perspective and WordPress perspective. So, it's I think it's an interesting conversation anyway.
It is. Well, that's what our podcast is about. It's about WordPress and security and innovation. And there's a lot of innovation happening with being able to collect data and that obviously brings us into the conversation about what data are we collecting, especially about people who are just moving about. So.
For sure. Now, we just put out a really amazing interview with Kim from MailPoet, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, so definitely check that out. Kim is, I forget his title, but is he the CEO?
He's a founder. He's a founder of MailPoet.
He's a founder. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. And Kim and I became friends years ago when he had a vulnerability disclosed by another company and wanted to chat about that. And then we actually met at, I think it was the last WordCamp for San Francisco. And I had the pleasure of seeing him again in St. Louis. And when I didn't know he was coming, and when I saw him, I was so excited because Kim is such a nice guy. And he's tall. He's got to be like 6'5" or something like that. And just a super, super nice guy. So I really loved chatting with him. And then of course we chatted on the podcast as well. And I think we had a really fun conversation. And that was filmed in our booth at WordCamp US, which actually turned out into this really great location for conversations because we had good audio, but we also had a little bit of that ambient buzz of WordCamp US and so on. So definitely check that out. And that brings us to the conclusion for this week's podcast. So If you're watching on YouTube, definitely like and subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, give us a review. It really helps us to make other people aware of the show that we have. And have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone. Bye.